And I think this is such a huge part of the equation for people who aren't married is choosing the right spouse. I just don't think we can understate that, or overstate that. Like that is a huge part of the equation. And she's really been a blessing. She's trusted me to kind of lead us in that direction. And that was a real struggle at first.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 192. Clark, how's it going? What's going on in your world?
Good, man. How are you doing? Nothing too crazy with me here.
Yeah, doing great, man. Just rocking and rolling here in the summertime. We're getting close to episode 200. Getting super excited for that, obviously. We've got a lot of fun things that we've been putting together in the pipeline for the podcast, and you and I personally coming up here this summer and into the fall. So we've got a lot of great things to announce here pretty soon. Real excited about that.
Yeah, and then with the fall starts school, obviously, again. And I saw an article this week talking about introducing personal finance education into more elementary and junior high schools and high schools, or not elementary, but junior highs and high schools. And so this article, this is just on CNBC, it says, so far in 2021, 25 states in the U.S. have introduced legislation that would add personal finance education to their high school curriculum. And they mentioned the states: Arkansas, Hawaii, Nebraska, Colorado, Nevada. And then it says 7 states: Virginia, Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, Utah, North Carolina, and Mississippi have the gold standard of personal finance education, a standalone half-semester course that focuses only on personal finance. Beyond that, about 21 states require some personal finance education. Let's say it can be incorporated into another course. So that's a pretty interesting change. I feel like that's new, right? I never took any personal finance class until I got to college. Did you?
Yeah, no, I didn't really have anything either. I mean, obviously I took some finance type related classes in high school. One of my elective courses just because I was interested in it, but it wasn't really geared toward personal finance. It was just more towards, finance in general and corporate finance, I guess, to some degree. But yeah, I think it's great. Keep getting our young people educated. I mean, a lot of this probably happens at the home, if it happens at all. And in some cases, it probably doesn't happen until most people are grown-ups. That's why we have so many people getting involved into it, in their 30s and 40s and 50s, because they never were taught at a younger age. So I think it's great legislation, and hopefully the programs that are put in place are beneficial to students. I have my own thoughts on education and how we educate and stuff, but I do think spending time on things that are more applicable for people's lives is definitely a step in the right direction versus, things that maybe we spend a lot of time on, a lot of money on that don't really further people's education, or they basically learn the information to take the test and move on. I'm sure you did a little bit of that even in college, didn't you, Clark?
Right, for sure. Like what you're required to take. Yeah. I mean, nerdy people like us, right, CPAs and into personal finance, I mean, I think we'd agree that I would at least say that everybody should be required to take a personal finance class in college before they graduate.
Yeah, I agree.
I just, you could cover basics too of insurance, home insurance, car insurance, medical bills. I mean, all this stuff that you really don't figure out in life until you're thrown into the situation. Yeah. And I don't know if everybody would take away a lot, but at least when something happened in their, real life after they graduate, it wouldn't be the first time they see something.
Yeah, just building that foundation. And I think you're totally right. At college and maybe even a high school, because not everybody goes to college. And just making sure that for the most part, we've got a somewhat educated population as it relates to things that are very applicable and they're going to actually experience across all facets, no matter where they live, no matter what city, no matter what industry they get into, they're going to experience having to deal with finances, taxes, etc. So let's educate them a little bit on it. Instead of spending time on German Poca history or whatever, that we have to take, it's like, all right, man, I'll take the test and forget about all this stuff because it's not really applicable for me, but not that history's not good. I think it's good to learn from history, but
no, the big thing, especially in high school, would be student loans, right?
Yeah,
because
totally.
You don't
Those
want,
are right in
you
front
don't
of
want to
you.
learn that your senior year of high school and then realize you really messed up. So I think the first step in high school would be student loans and what that really means before you go out and take out a bunch of loans to get a degree that you struggle to pay back.
Yeah, totally. So last week's episode, we had Jeff, the wealthy custodian. You remember him from episode number 47, released in September 2018. Super popular guest. We had him back on to kind of discuss how he's moved into that next phase of his life and discuss about how, he really has become that millionaire on less than $50,000. So great episode with him. Really appreciated it to him and his contributions to the show. It's what makes this show super great. This week we've got Jay. Jay's got a net worth of $1.3 million, just over. We get into his story, how he's got his net worth allocated, his investments and strategy. Appreciate you engaging online. We had a great listener question come in this week that we'll be playing with future interviews here shortly. If you're interested, submit a question, ask a millionaire on SpeakPipe on our website, millionairesunveiled.com, and we'll go ahead and add that into various interviews that we do over the next several weeks. Without any further delay, let's get into the episode with Jay.
Jay, do you want to just give us a little about your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, absolutely, guys. First, thanks for having me on. I'm 35. I'm an engineer. I work for the Department of Defense, and my wife is also an engineer. She works full-time for the Department of Defense also. We're both civil servants.
And what's your net worth?
So our liquid net worth just in equities is a little over 1.5. And with our house and vehicles and just all assets, we are at 1.8, right at 1.8 million.
Dang, man, that's awesome. So let's get into that a little bit. You got 1.5 in equities. How is that broken up? Is that retirement accounts, cash?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start from the biggest and work backwards. So our largest, unfortunately, I don't want it to be this way, but it is. Our largest is a taxable account. It's just under $700K, sitting at $695 right now. Our 401ks are in something called the Thrift Savings Plan, which is the government's 401k. It's at $461. And then we both have Roth IRAs. We're out of the contribution limits, but we do backdoor Roth IRAs. That's at $217. We both have 529s for all of our kids. We have 3 kids, age 5 and under, 5, 3, and 1. And we're right at $157K in their 529s. And then we have a little bit of cash on the side.
You're crushing it. So is that all in index funds, mutual funds, or individual stocks?
Yeah, so currently we have no individual stocks. I have in the past, and we'll talk about that later. Mine personally was more like in the mistakes part of this interview, but most of ours is it's all in index funds. Most of it's mutual funds, and we just recently started getting into exchange traded funds because I wanted to go after something pretty specific.
Wow. And has the allocation always been like that since you started investing?
No, it hasn't. So when I first started out, I just kept it simple. I bought the whole market. I think the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index and the Total International Stock Market Index. And I tried to stick with that. And then from there, we've actually owned some bonds in our past. We've been cash home investors in our 2 primary residences. We've owned. I know we'll talk about that. But to get ready for that, we actually got in some bonds, and so a decent amount there. We've had both just total bond market index for Vanguard, and we've owned some municipal bonds, so some intermediate term bonds to get ready for those purchases, just to try to reduce the risk a little bit before having to buy.
Interesting. Do you think you'll keep this portfolio allocation going forward as you continue to grow your net worth?
I think so. We're trying to correct back to something more like what I'd like to be. Currently, we are. Let's see. I'll pull it up for you here. Yeah, we're between large, mid, and small cap and international. We're just over 40% large cap right now, and about 25% mid and small, and then 10% international. So I'm trying to correct that back. I'd like to be about 70-30 U.S. to international, but I do see keeping this going forward. What I'd like to do is actually like to get some tax advice, some professional tax advice here coming up, and try to figure out ways we can funnel less towards our taxable account and more towards some tax sheltered plans. And so I've kind of run out of ideas. We've been self-managed now, since we've been married for the past 7 years, and I'm running out of good ideas for how to get some tax sheltering.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you said you've got about $300K in home equity. Is that a paid-for house, or do you still have some debt on that?
No, that's totally paid for. So we bought our first house in cash, the starter home. And then we upgraded once we had 3 kids into our current residence, and that was just a cash purchase.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. So always been debt free then?
I have. My wife never had any student loans. We've both been really blessed by that. We have great families. Her family bought our state's prepaid tuition plan, so she never had any debt coming out. I actually went to the Air Force Academy, so I never had any debt coming out. We got a small loan when we were there. It's like a career starter loan, and so I guess you could consider that kind of a student loan. But it was just a $30,000 loan, personal loan at 1% interest, and so that was paid off within 5 years according to their payoff schedule. And I actually invested that all in 2007, right before this really, really awesome time in the market. And so learned from that. And I used a lot of those. That was part of what went into buying my first house with cash. And that was in 2011. I bought that house.
So the house in cash, how much was the house?
The first house was $145K.
And how much do you think it's worth now?
So actually, we just sold it last
okay.
year. Uh-huh. Yeah, we sold that house and we bought this one, and it appreciated to $185.
Nice.
And it's been a red hot real estate market here, and it's kind of it's interesting. But a major Japanese car manufacturer is building a plant in our hometown, and they bought the house with cash to put some of their Japanese auto workers in.
Oh, really?
And rent it out to them. So yeah, we did it for sale by owner.
Yeah, and then you bought the other house cash too, or your second home. Okay.
Right.
So for sale by owner, let's talk about that, because I think people hear about it a lot, but don't necessarily do it. Was it harder to sell?
No, not for us. So we didn't actually start out that way. And it's an interesting story. We started interviewing real estate agents. And so we interviewed 4 or 5 agents to the point my wife thought, I was just being ridiculous. But the thing we heard over and over is just because there's so much business coming into this area and a lot of construction happening, that there's just not enough supply of houses on the market. And so it's like the same script over and over. And what we heard them say was, we'll list your house on a Thursday and we'll sell it by Sunday night. And that's it. And you'll have multiple offers. They'll all be above asking price.
Wow.
And so, by the 4th or 5th person, I'm looking at my wife and I'm thinking, why do we need to pay them? Because, the agent's fees. Right. And so we started researching a little bit and saying, like, is it even possible? And they gave us market reports, so I knew what their pricing strategy was going to be going in. And I did some research on it. I didn't know anybody who'd ever sold their own house, and so we did some research. And we hired a professional photographer, got it listed on MLS, paid a flat fee provider on the internet to do it. And there were some challenges there. I'd much rather it'd been easier to do it through somebody, but we saved right at about $8,000, $7,500 just doing it on our own. So it was worth it.
Wow. Yeah. Good for you. So you guys are crushing it here, right? I mean, you're really young, high net worth, almost $2 million if you include the house. How did this happen so quickly?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. So I think really to tell the story, my story anyway, you kind of have to start with the family, right? We're both very close with our families. We both have really good families. And my story in particular is I think it's kind of cool. But all the way back, my family has always been farmers. It's always been agriculture is kind of the area we live in. And they just came from nothing. I mean, nothing. And so I think a lot of people have this story. I think it's part of the American story. It's not the immigrant part of the story, which is also awesome. I love the immigrant story. But we have the same thing. So my parents just absolutely came from nothing. They learned like what other people learn on a farm, right? You learn how to do everything yourself, to grow your own food, to fix everything. It's that kind of self-subsistence, like very strong independence and really strong frugality is taught, from generation to generation. So they kind of escaped that, and they both knew they wanted something different, and so they pursued education. And they're like that kind of classic story, right? First in their family to graduate high school, first in their family to go to college, and they became professionals. In a sense, my mom was a nurse, and my dad was a cop, and so they taught us the same thing. The power of saving, the power of education was something they just preached, to us growing up. And so we knew there's no other choice, but we had to go to college. And they didn't talk a lot about investing. That was, I'd say, one thing looking back and nobody ever taught them. They didn't have any kind of training, any kind of mentors in investing, the time value of money and the power of compounding interest, right? They didn't really know that. The stock market was kind of scary to them, coming out of parents who lived through the Depression, their parents. And so but very much from an early age, my grandma preached. Anytime she gave us money, I was like, take this and put it in the bank, and one day you'll have something, right? So I can still remember her telling me that, put this away and one day you'll have something. And so growing up, worked jobs, I had an entrepreneurial streak. I think that comes really strong from my family. Kind of funny. My great granddad, they were totally broke. So he ended up taking part of his corn crop one year, and they decided they were going to start making whiskey. And so that's like the classic American South story, right? They got into making whiskey, and they sold it to distributors and wholesalers, and so that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit, right? So my granddad worked in a factory and bought a farm so that he could make some extra money on the side. So he had a side hustle going before they were called side hustles, and I think our families have a huge impact on us. We see good behaviors or bad behaviors, and luckily I was able to build on that. Working through high school, working through college, being at the academy, we had a personal finance and investing class that we took, and it really taught me. That's the first time I remember seeing compound interest. What is that? Why it's important to start, as early as you can. So that's why it started. And my wife had a good background too, and no debt, and we were able to meet up and kind of put our incomes together.
Yeah, and then obviously good income and putting it in the market and having a good last 10 years or so, right? A strong market, that obviously helps too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, having lived through, the 2008, 2009 timeframe and just seeing what that does. And so luckily it gave some resilience. There's a whole generation of investors out there, I realize, out on Robinhood or doing whatever, and they've never seen a huge downturn until COVID. So I'm happy. We're fortunate to have seen a downturn, and now too, I guess. And there's others in between, but yeah, to know this isn't normal.
So did you guys live super frugally, or did you feel like you were still doing what you wanted to do, but just saving at the same time?
So we've lived frugally. I'd say, so I told you my family background. My wife really came from a wealthy family. And so I would say they were very frugal as well, but not to the level that my family was. They taught her good habits coming into the marriage, and I have to really give her credit. And I think this is such a huge part of the equation for people who aren't married, is choosing the right spouse. I just don't think we can understate that or overstate that. That is a huge part of the equation. And she's really been a blessing. She's trusted me to kind of lead us in that direction. And that was a real struggle at first. I remember when we first got married, it was really hard for her to see her friends on social media getting, especially new cars. So we drive like beaters, I'll tell you about that if you want to know about it. But that was really hard for her. She's like, my best friend just got a new car. It sure would be nice to have a new car. And so we had to kind of walk through that and, just pulling up, investing calculators, financial calculators, and just being like, hey, if we take what would be a car payment, if we take what would be, a $40,000, $50,000 car and invest it, look what it will be in 10 years. What can we do with that kind of money in 10 years? And so her starting small, and I think her seeing that, over the years we've been together has really paid off and hopefully, shown her, here we are talking to you guys, 7 years later. So there's been some results clearly.
No, it's amazing. Congrats on your guys' success, and thanks for your service in the Air Force, obviously, as well.
Yeah, thanks.
So along that, with the savings and the frugality and what we're talking about, do you have a sense of what your savings rate has been?
Yes, it's kind of interesting. I've never actually, until we kind of preparing to talk to you guys, I've never just calculated it out as far as our, percentage of our gross income. But we're actually saving 54% of our gross between the two of us. And we've made that a priority from the start. And we kind of worked backwards based off savings. And then, of course, there's our taxes. So we actually live off of 20% of our gross. And of that, over $20,000 a year goes to daycare to keep our kids on the military installation. So we actually live household expenses, insurance premiums, everything you can think of, food, entertainment. We live on about $30,000 a year. So that's really what's given us this horsepower.
So was the savings rate higher before the kids came?
Yes.
Or rather, were the household expenses lower, right? I assume, unless you guys were traveling more, or maybe you were doing different things.
Yeah, I would say before kids, we were probably giving more than we are now. And so we drew down some of that a couple years ago because we had to start we were going to have to start batching our giving. So I know you guys know about that, but we were under the standard deduction for our giving. And so we actually started holding off so we could batch it. And so that was about 2 years ago. Anyway, we haven't actually started that process. We're still in the batching phase.
And you're saying so that you itemize every other year, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that was the strategy we were going for. So we actually got to, as part of a free kind of seminar at work, a wealth advisor came out, ended up like talking to him a little bit. And it was a total blind spot I'd never thought about, was after the tax laws changed. We itemized every year until the tax laws changed and the standard deduction went higher. And so we were under that standard deduction limit for a couple of years. And I never honestly thought about it. So that's when we had to change strategy.
Yeah, so that's a unique strategy, right? And just for our listeners, right, when the standard deduction went up to, what is it, Jay, 24, 25,000, 26, somewhere around there, right?
Yep.
Right.
And so before it was, what was it before? 12?
So it was 12,000, I think.
Yeah, 12,000. So before, if you itemized, especially if you lived in a high cost of living area, right, with high state and local taxes like New York or California, you could often itemize that because of that. But when they capped that threshold, right, it wasn't necessarily as easy to itemize if you lived in one of those areas unless you had a super high amount of charitable contributions. So that's what he's talking about here. So jumping back to your upbringing, Jay, you talked about how your parents kind of instilled this in you and they taught you and they gave you this foundation. How did you then take that to investing? How did you then take that to say, this is what I want to do, here's what I'm going to learn, and these are the decisions I want to start making? Because I feel like oftentimes that comes from somebody who's influential, right? You meet someone or you come across a book or an article or have a conversation where that becomes the focus. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that transition happened in college for me. So coming out of high school, I still remember in high school, something was interesting. I was interested in how do I maximize money, my income, even working after school jobs in high school. And I remember going to the bank one time and talking to them. And one of the things, the only real exposure I had to investments was, a checking account, a savings account, a CD. And I learned about bonds on my own. Nobody else told me what a bond was. And to be clear, I don't really think a checking account or a savings account is an investment or a CD. So, I know it's a, cash only type of investment, but that's clearly not what we're talking about here. So I learned about bonds, and then I was in there one day and I was talking to one of the reps in the bank, and he asked me, do you know anything about stocks or mutual funds? So we kind of talked about it a little bit, and I talked to my dad, and he was, to him, red flags started going up, right? The stock market is risk, it's danger. And that has changed over time, by the way, with him. But so actually I talked to him, and I talked him into he didn't have to let me. He let me make my own decisions, but
yeah.
I talked to my dad, and I invested a little bit into a conservative. I don't know what it is anymore. It was a conservative mutual fund and an aggressive mutual fund. And then I watched it constantly, which is the worst thing you could do. And within a couple of months, I had lost, I want to say I put in $8,000. I had lost $300 within a couple of months. And it was just like the world was over, right? I was so upset. I pulled my money out. And my dad just felt terrible. And I remember to this day, he paid me the money that I lost out of his own pocket. And so it's such a teachable moment, right? But he wasn't grown up he didn't grow up like that either. And so, going off to college, all my money, and I put it into Series I bonds, right? The treasury bills. And because that was the best thing going at the time. And so I went to college. The track I went at the academy it's called Systems Engineering Management. And it's almost where business meets engineering. And so part of my business curriculum, I had to take, financial accounting. I had to take, personal finance and investing. I had to take, managerial economics. And some of my professors were really open about their real estate investments. I know you guys are definitely big proponents of real estate. And we started learning about stocks and bonds and in returns. And so that's what happened. Mine came through formal education. And I know everybody's different, but that was my first exposure to it with someone who really, it was presented well in a way I could understand it. And I remember staying after class talking to my professors about it, asking them what they were doing. And at that time, I had just barely started getting into some stocks. I was going through, one of the investment houses, and my fees were huge. And I didn't even know what that was, so they started talking to me and saying, well, have you thought about your expense ratios? And I said, no, tell me more kind of thing. And so they were the first people to recommend Vanguard, which is just, one of many, many options out there, low cost investment houses. But anyway, so that's how I got into it.
Yeah. No, I know you mentioned that college class, and I was just curious if you had another conversation, but it sounds like some time with your dad, right, helped you learn that. So
Yes.
I've said this on the show a couple times, Jace. I think we've talked about this, that people listen to this show, I think, for a few different reasons. One is to hear the allocation, right, of how millionaires invest their money. 2 is to hear the story, right, about how they did it. And then 3, which is becoming more popular as we talk to people, is they want to understand psychologically what motivates people to invest, to grow their income, to grow their net worth. So what is that for you? I mean, obviously you're still young and you have almost $2 million here in net worth. What's been the motivation? Is it freedom? Is it to care for your family? Is it so that you're not poor, that you have opportunity, that you can travel? I mean, what's the motivation here for you?
Yeah, good question. I think the motivation isn't freedom per se, and I don't think it's not to be poor, because I never really thought that I was going to be poor, especially after getting an education, getting in the military, and just kind of seeing the world a little bit. And it's like, okay, it's going to be okay. All I ever really wanted to be was to be comfortable. I remember telling my friends that. It's like, I just want to be comfortable and have a good living. That's really it. And the biggest goal for me was $100,000 a year in income. And I remember saying that at the academy, and I was thinking, okay, if I make it to lieutenant colonel, I can make $100,000 a year 20 years from now, right? And we actually hit that in the early 30s. So that was kind of like, okay, well, now what? Right? So, and we started, and $1 million is kind of that goal for everybody. There's something special about that. And then that came and went. And we're like, okay, well, now what? But I think at the end of the day, deep down, when my wife says like, why can't I have a new car early on, right? And I think a big part of that was for me was to build options, to buy them option space, where, and I tell her all the time, if something bad happened to me, I want you to be taken care of. And so part of the reason I had to get out of the military, I have a pre-existing condition, and which makes getting life insurance really crazy expensive for me. And so I haven't told her just the last couple of weeks is, I would like to have 10 to 12 times my annual salary in life insurance. I don't. I have about half that. And that's just what I'm able to get through my government job. But getting it from the outside is crazy. It's not affordable. It's not reasonable. And so what I'd like to do is I like to take care of them. And I get a sense of peace out of that, knowing that, if the worst were to happen, they're going to be fine financially. It's one less thing for them to have to worry about. There's going to be plenty already. Right. So I think that's really a motivator for us, and to be able to provide for our kids. Everybody wants a good future for their kids. And I would like them to be able to start out like we did without having that kind of weight around your neck of this huge debt. I remember one of the guys that I work with is a fantastic gentleman. He's from New York, and he went to school down in Florida. He went to a private college in Florida, and we're in our mid-30s. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he still has $80,000 in student loan debt. And I just remember thinking, like, it's hard to breathe, like thinking about that to me, because we've been debt free for a long, long time, and I just felt for him, and I don't want that for our kids if we can help it at all.
Yeah, that's a good answer, right? And we've had people come on the show that have had that amount of debt or more, right? And haven't become doctors or lawyers, and they talk about how crippling it's been. And now that they've been able to climb out of it, and I mean, the ones that we're interviewing have obviously done that and have a higher net worth of at least $1 million or something. So they've been able to climb out. But I mean, you're spot on, right? They talk about that. So what age did you become a millionaire?
I was 33. My wife was 31, and it was just by happenstance. It wasn't like we try not to look. we really do, because I'd say first off, we don't want our worth to come from this. We don't want like a seed of a love for money and this like materialism. We really want to fight against that. And so we looked every once in a while. And I think by the time we looked, we were actually almost like 1.2. And so I remember we were sitting on the couch, we were watching Netflix, and she just wants to know there's enough money to like, are we okay? If are we okay? Everything okay? I'm okay. Good. I'm gonna go back to
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I'm sitting on the couch. I'm running the spreadsheets, and we're watching Netflix, and I kind of was like, "Hey, we're millionaires." And she looked at me. She's like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah." Okay, that's cool. And so we just kind of it was the I'll never forget. It was the weirdest thing, and we just kind of turned the show back on, and it was really weird.
So along this journey and since becoming millionaire and almost 2 here, are there a couple things that you can point to that say, hey, that's what did it for me? Was it that you started investing early? I mean, obviously a piece of it was that you didn't have any debt, right? So you could start investing right away, and that you took action and did. But anything that you can point to, whether it's you worked hard in your career, you tried to move up, or I mean, what made you a millionaire that you could point to?
I think the willingness to take risk, and that's going to be, compared to some other people, like some of you guys and a lot of the listeners, like you would laugh at a person who's a bureaucrat in part of the government system. You laugh at them for saying that they are willing to take risk, right? Because this is like the most unrisky, assured job. Almost like if a tenure could have like a tenured professor could have like super tenure. That's what that is, right? It's very stable. But we have actually taken risks. I've been okay with taking risk early in our investments and being okay with it, and trying not to look and not to let it affect our lifestyle. So I'd say that's one. The second thing was taking risk actually in our positions. So where we are in the government, we really have to move to advance. And there's a certain risk associated with that, especially, your first job out of college, moving away from that for some people can be kind of an emotional thing, a decision. But I actually left a permanent government job to move to a temporary job, and so that's kind of a weird thing that I'm sure some companies do. But in the government, it is very much like a tenured position. You're a permanent employee. I voluntarily gave that up to join this other much larger pool of government workers in a different organization because there's just a lot more room to advance over there. And people, I will never forget, they did not have good things to say about that. Like you've lost your mind. But there's a 25% raise. And I figured, okay, I'll hopefully, we'll land. My wife, she's bringing in the stable income, and maybe we can pivot this into a permanent job. And that's what happened. And so things like that, willingness to move, willingness to take risks, has been a big factor. But then, beyond marrying the right spouse, because that's huge, I would say the other thing is, lifestyle. The lifestyle has been the biggest asset for us.
Jay, as you've gone on this journey, you bring up risk. How do you evaluate risk, whether it's in your investments or taking that job, that new position you talked about? Because, one might look from the outside and say, well, I don't think that's much risk, but you feel it's risk. So how do you evaluate risk?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to think about that for a second. So I guess
let me ask this. Why do you consider an investment, what you've done with your portfolio, why is that considered risk to you?
Well, I would say because it's always harder to put faith in something that you can't see, right? And so this is all numbers. We're going to take real dollars and cents out of our pockets and put it into something on the screen, right? That it's numbers on my laptop, right? And so I'd say there's some level of fundamental risk there to say, I'm going to give up having a material something now, or a material comfort or a trip now, for something that I can't see, for some hope that's going to be delivered in the future. And so I would say there's, a basic level of risk there. But for me, I guess how I evaluate risk is, what is the worst that can happen? Okay. So, a 50% downturn, would I really be able to keep that invested? And, and there's differences, I think, in behaviors between an equity investor and a real estate investor. And I have no exposure really to real estate investing, so I can't even imagine the challenges there. But I know one of the biggest challenges is, as an equity investor solely, is ourselves, right? So how much risk am I really willing to stomach when a 2008, 2009 happens? And so having come through that, you can be more confident in what your answer is going to be. We buy in downturns. So I'd say that how we evaluate risk is, I try to look at the big picture and realize that it's going to be okay, especially because we're well diversified. I've only ever bought one individual stock. And it's just not required, in my opinion. I just think most people, the vast majority of people, don't need to do that. Certainly you can, and I have in the past, but it didn't get us to our first million. I'll tell you that.
Oh, it's an interesting answer. And I think it's an interesting discussion too, because everyone evaluates risk a little bit differently, and you bring it up as it relates to your investment portfolio, but here you are sitting at $1.8 million and with a significant net worth for your age. And, from the outside, one might say, well, there's no risk involved, right? But we've also had a bull market. But
yeah,
like you mentioned, walking down that path of what's the worst that can happen. I mean, there's still an element of it could go down, right? And it has gone down. It's just that long-term play, right? For the most part, statistically speaking, investments in equities in the markets have gone up.
I will tell you one risk that does bother me. I've considered it, and we've talked about it. And so this is where I would like to learn from you guys, guys like you, is we have been interested in the past in getting into real estate investing. And I love some of the advantages that are available there. One of the things that I do worry about, and I know that, in economic downturns, I've heard people's stories losing, they lose their assets, especially, in real estate. And I know Dave Ramsey's famous for that, right? And I've looked at some of the numbers, and to make it work for us, my initial thought is that we would need to leverage, to use mortgages to make it worth to make the ROI we would need to have to make it worth it to us versus equity investments. But I do worry about taking on leveraged, to take on debt. I worry about the risk that would pose to the other 1.8, right? So I would want to do that smartly and not do it kind of haphazardly where we're going to put a risk and put everything we worked for at risk. So that's one thing that does makes me take pause. I'm less comfortable with that than equities risk.
Interesting. Is that the main reason you haven't ventured into real estate or at least a lot of real estate at this point?
Yeah, I would say that's not the main reason, actually. The main reason is, first, it scares me because I'm scared of what I would be, what kind of person I would become, because I know that I would just become obsessed and just totally dive into it, and just spend every waking hour like learning what I could and putting our money into it and trying to evaluate deals. And we're married with 3 kids, and they are worth as much time as I can possibly give them because we both work full time. And one of the things that I don't want to let my idea of providing for my kids get in the way of actually investing time in them. And so that's what scares me most off, is that I would just become consumed by it. And we actually met with a wealth advisor a while back, and I asked him about that. And one of the things he asked was like, well, do you need it? How much money is enough, kind of thing. And it was a surprising answer. I didn't think he would say that, but he did. He looked at us and he's like, if you want to, but run the numbers. Where are you going to be in 40 years? And it gets pretty ridiculous. Just the time value of money is crazy in compounding interest. So I don't know. That's what makes me hesitate.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Do your family and friends know of your wealth?
Not at all. No, no. I think our family and friends know that. They know how we live. They know we both have government jobs, and it's very similar to the military. I mean, you can Google civil servant pay scales, and so if you both knew that we were GS-14s, you could go across the pay scale and you'd say, okay, yeah, this is where they live and this is how much money they make. But I think the difference is what we do with it, right? And that we live completely differently than them, and so. No, and we really want to keep it that way because we don't want people to look at us differently or treat us differently, and we want to be the kind of people that use that to do something positive with, and not just to, I don't know. We don't want to be known for our money because we don't really think of ourselves as that either. We're just regular. There's nothing special about us. I promise you.
You mentioned earlier that your wife came from a wealthy family. What was that like bridging, your 2 backgrounds and philosophies and getting to and arriving to where you are today?
Okay, so that's probably the funniest thing about our marriage. So she's in here with me. She can't hear you, but so it could not possibly be more different. Our family backgrounds to me. She might not agree, but you have like the agriculture farmer bootstrap fight to survive kind of thing. Raise all your own food. If it can be fixed, I'll find a way. Versus like her dad told me one time that he hasn't mowed a lawn in 20 years. And it's not worth his time. If you look up this, hourly rate, there's no way I can pay for a lot of lawns to be mowed for that hourly rate, right? So bridging that between us was like the clash of cultures, right? And it is kind of funny. So we've met in the middle. I would say some things, it was very surprising for them that we would like fix our own cars. That I find satisfaction in like mowing our grass, taking care of the house, working on stuff. When something breaks, like I'll Google it and try to figure it out. And I've talked to her dad about it, and it's kind of funny. He's like, well, I just never really had an interest in that, but that's interesting. So yeah, they definitely very different backgrounds. The funniest part actually is not just us talking about it, but seeing our parents together, like talking through different things, and they have such different styles, especially our dads. So that's pretty comical. but everybody gets along really well. It's a very good compliment. Like, we bought this house, my parents didn't give us any money, but they were here every day, all day, painting, digging ditches, doing whatever we need to do to the house. And her parents, their solution was that they showed up a little bit, but their solution was like, hey, can we help financially? Can we write a small check? What can we do? But their avenue immediately was money. My parents' avenue immediately was elbow grease. So it's just two different cultures, and it was really funny to me.
Yeah, that's an interesting, dynamic there. And I think we've had a few on that have had that, where you're coming from these two different backgrounds, and merging, and you're trying to figure it out. How do you think y'all will approach it with your children?
Yeah, so we've talked about that. It's really interesting. I think it will be a hybrid approach. We want to teach them the benefits of just a frugal lifestyle. We really want to fight against materialism. And we've seen that in ourselves. Of course, we see it in our world. And we really want to fight against this consumer mentality for the sake of consuming, right? So we've tried to limit and ask people to limit. I'd say that this comes to a head every Christmas. For anybody with kids, especially if you've got parents that like to give, and aunts and friends and family. And so we've had to try to talk to people and say, hey, could you, maybe limit it to like one big toy from your family this Christmas, let's just not go over the top. So we both agree on that for sure. We agree on the frugality because we've seen the immediate results. It's not immediate, but 7 years in the big scheme of things is a short time frame. And we've seen just the power that can have. I would say from investing standpoint, that's where I want to depart from my family and the way I was raised. Obviously, we want to teach saving from a very early age, and we're trying to work through that. But we want to teach the value of compound interest, and we want to teach the value of time, and to really work through our kids with that. So one of the things we've actually been looking into, our oldest is only 5, so we got a lot of time, but we would like to work through some, instead of like an allowance, like let's bring into an equities investment piece to that for our kids. So, they can actually, whether it's a real or like a phantom account, where they can learn to kind of look at companies and evaluate and make some decisions, and then hopefully put some real money toward it, even if it's really small amounts. So we'd like to bring that in and let them, give them a good start on that, and try to teach them as best we can while they're still here.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. So as you progress, is there a point down the road where you think you might take the foot off the gas, whether it be, working full time or, doing the different things that you're doing, as your net worth kind of, at this point, your compounded interest is going to outpace probably what you can put into your portfolio. Is there a point where you're going to kind of hang it up or relax or take the foot off the gas?
It's an interesting thing. So you're right. Just running the numbers based on the historical average return of the market in 4 years, it's just crazy to us. I didn't know this until this week, but in 4 years, we're projected to, our portfolio will return more than our income, just like you said. So that's never been a thing, even a possibility in my mind. So it's really crazy. We have talked before, and one of the other motivations was, with my wife, we didn't know if she would want to keep working, if and when we had more kids. And I don't know that we'll have more now. She very emphatically says no. So I think we're done.
I know that response.
yeah, I think we're done. So that's still kind of an option. If somebody has something that comes up, we've kind of talked about some like passion projects that we might want to pursue in the future, and that could be something. But we really like our jobs. It's really rewarding, and I could definitely see us continuing that work all the way till retirement age and hanging it up. So I'd say 50-50 either way.
Awesome. Well, just in closing here, let me wrap up with some rapid fire questions and get some last words of advice, and then we'll cut it off because I know we're going long on you here. So as much as you're comfortable sharing on these, what's been your range of annual household income through your working life?
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So when I first started with the government in 2010, I was making $44,000 a year. My wife was making $53,000. And so we've gone from there to now we're, our government paychecks, we're at $243 right now combined.
Wow, good for you guys. And what's your household spending?
It's approximately 52 right now, $52K. That's with the 21K in daycare. So we're just over $30,000 annually for the household.
Okay. And then I think we touched on this, but financial goals, anything specific?
No, there's not at this time. And we're just going to try to ride it as long as we can.
And then what's the most expensive car you've ever purchased?
$7,300, a champagne minivan.
Yeah, because I think you wrote in the initial email, right? The car you drive has, 230,000 miles on it?
It does. Yes, 20 years old, 230,000 miles.
Holy cow. So what are you getting next? You're going to splurge on something, or are you going to buy something used for $8,000 again?
I don't know. So what's actually going to happen versus what do I think, a dream I'll do? I dream that I'll get a Tesla, right? Or, some kind of electric car, because we're engineers and we think it's cool. But yeah, I'll probably go get a beater Honda Civic.
Why, man? $100 and you're in your mid-30s.
Get the Tesla. It's the most common. It's the most commonly referred to car on our show.
Oh yeah.
And getting one used, you look at it's going to last you probably 20 years, maybe 25 or 30.
I know. Yes, it's hard to take those habits out, right? It's
I know.
I heard you guys talked about that before. Like, when do you flip the switch from becoming from saver to spender? That's so hard. I don't know. Because the behaviors that it takes to get there, how do you just change that lifestyle immediately? And I don't see us doing it, to be honest with you. I think we'd rather find something we can be passionate about that's something positive has to come out of this, because otherwise, why have we been given this kind of wealth? And that's kind of where we're starting to focus now.
Alrighty. So last question here. When you look back at your story, right, your mid-30s, almost $2 million, how much of this was due to luck and how much of this was due to skill?
Okay, I would say luck is the stock market, right? So we could have had a 10-year, the lost decade, right? And we may or may not be having this conversation. So I would say that has been the luck piece, because none of us can control that. I would say all the rest has been trying to learn, being blessed just with that curiosity to try to see how do we maximize this thing, and what kind of behaviors can we modify, and what gratification can we delay, and at some healthy level, but yeah, so I'd say that's not been luck. That's been sacrifice and intentional decision making.
And would that be your final advice too? Is just to be intentional about what you're doing?
I think so. I think, keep it simple. We don't have to get crazy or try to be, super sophisticated and pick the latest hot stock. That's been one of my biggest mistakes early on, trying to do that and kind of keep up and compete there. And I would say start young and the discipline.
All right. Well, awesome. I think we've taken enough of your time now. So thanks for sharing really cool stuff. Really great story, and congrats on you and to you and your wife on your success. So phenomenal job. And thanks for coming on. So everybody, that's Jay, net worth of $1.8 million. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys, both of you. Appreciate what you do.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.